In gamer lingo, we like to talk about games being either linear or non-linear. When someone says something is linear, you can probably picture that in your head. It looks like a line, naturally. But what shape does non-linear look like? It's no secret that one so-called non-linear game might have a completely different story structure than another non-linear game. It's at this point in the script that I realize I've said non-linear so many times that the word is losing meaning, but that's my point. Non-linear isn't the most useful term to describe a game's story. Whether you're a developer, a game reviewer, a TTRPG game master, or just the average gamer, non-linear doesn't tell you anything about what a game is, only what it isn't. In this video, I want to look back at a random handful of my favorite single-player games and figure out if the shape of their story isn't a line, what is the shape of their stories? Some spoilers ahead, obviously. First, we need a quick example of a game that is definitely linear to set a baseline. Halo 3's story looks like this. 9 missions in order, no options for dialogue, no options for who to shoot or who not to shoot, one ending, plus a slightly longer cutscene if you beat it on the hardest difficulty. About as linear as AAA games get. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, I love this game. And you could say this about thousands of other games, but the story is what it is, exactly the same every time, truly linear. For being honest, I could have picked just about any Pokemon game, but I was a Gen 3 kid, so we're going with Emerald. Pokemon Emerald's story looks like this. Most people wouldn't call Pokemon linear, but when you look at it, it's pretty close. While the world is technically open, the story isn't very malleable. Right away, you make one seemingly important choice about your first Pokemon, but after that, none of the very simple yes or no dialogue options really do much. You start by saving the professor and finish by catching the legendary on the box art and becoming the Pokemon League champion. Sure, you can customize your team and progress through the story at your own pace, but that's really it. You don't have a choice of what to do, but you do get options for how you do it. You are still traveling on a line, you've just got elbow room and time to stop and smell the roses. You aren't railroaded, but you are on a multi-lane highway with very few exits. Now we're really starting to branch out. Mass Effect 2 starts in a single place, but its ending has many variables and it's full of big, meaningful choices. Mass Effect 2's story looks like this. You begin with character customization and then are immediately shoved into a pretty linear intro mission. After that though, you open up into a bubble of freedom, where you can do things differently and in different orders before being forced into a mandatory mission again. This happens a few times, resulting in a story that looks like a series of bubbles, pinched together at crucial points. You'll notice that the end of Mass Effect 2's line is thicker than the other choke points, because it holds many more possibilities based on your choices before and during the final mission. Literally any character can die, including Commander Shepard. The other Mass Effect games, as well as the Dragon Age games, have a vaguely similar structure to this, so I call this shape BioWare Bubbles. From Software's first foray into the open world genre does some interesting things with its structure. Elden Ring's story looks like this. After character creation and an extremely brief tutorial, Elden Ring opens up its world to you. Even the real tutorial is entirely optional and you can take on the game's many dungeons, open world bosses, and first 4 major bosses in just about any order you want. Plus, there's a good number of side quests. There's 2 things that really change the shape of this game. The first is Ronnie's, Fia's, the Three Fingers, Gold Mask,
The Loathsome Dung-Eater
quest lines, which each have you fighting a ton of otherwise completely optional enemies, and each unlock new endings without actually changing much about the course of the plot until the very last cutscene. The second notable thing is the way the game bottlenecks itself when you get to the capital, then bottlenecks itself even further in the Forbidden Lands, only to then open back up again with optional content branching from the Snowfield, and then re-bottleneck in Farum Azula and the Ashen Capital. And then finally, it has multiple endings that you can pick from after the final boss. Because of these weird choke points and roadblocks in an otherwise open world, I call the shape of Elden Ring's story rough waves. With Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, Nintendo flipped the Zelda series structure on its head, turning it from a mostly linear experience that has existed since at least A Link to the Past, to a completely open-world masterpiece. Despite this openness, there are actually surprisingly few meaningful choices. Breath of the Wild's story looks like this. Assuming you aren't a speedrunner and you play the game as intended, you start with a tutorial and then go talk to Impa, where you learn about the divine beasts and what is essentially the 4 main quests of the game. Then, the world is your oyster. You can do most things in literally any order. However, you aren't really affecting the story itself very much. You're just picking the order that a bunch of very disconnected events happen in. As you whittle down your laundry list of tasks, you eventually find yourself with nothing left to do but go to the castle to face Ganon. I call the stories of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom funnels.
Activating short-range attack gear.
Nier Automata is a doozy. This game has a whopping 26 endings, one for each letter of the alphabet. Some of them are just jokes, but still, they make the credits roll so they count. Nier Automata's story looks something like this. You first play through the game as 2B, before playing the same story again from the point of view of 9S. Then 2B dies, and you play back and forth as 9S and A2. As this is all happening, you can engage in some side quests and might stumble upon the game's many strange endings. At the actual end of the game, you choose which of your 2 protagonists you play as in the final battle to get the last 2 endings, plus a third true ending after that. This intertwined dance between 2 main characters and dozens of endings and side paths shooting off of them makes a shape that looks like a frayed rope. This is gonna be so much work. With Baldur's Gate 3, Larian Studios attempts the impossible, capturing the infinite breadth of possibilities that can exist in a tabletop RPG in a finite video game. And they did a pretty damn good job of it. Baldur's Gate 3's massive story looks like this. The beginning of the game's complex, intertwined narrative looks something like a system of roots. Even before the game begins, your choice of character, be it one of the 6 origin characters, the Dark Urge, or your own OC, has massive implications for the rest of the game. In the first 2 acts, a handful of events are hard or impossible to avoid, like a solution to the conflict between the Tieflings, the Druids, and the Goblins, and the battle with Ketheric Thorm. But otherwise, just about everything else is entirely optional and can be done in just about any order, and in very different ways. Entire quest lines can be cut short by killing NPCs, and the consequences of your action can play out dozens of hours later. In Act 3, things change shape. Rather than all roads leading to Moonrise Towers, the roads in the city of Baldur's Gate meander and cross over each other. While looking for an objective for one quest, you're very likely to stumble upon 2 or 3 more things to do, and might even complete another quest entirely by accident. This contrast creates a point where the braided plotlines of Acts 1 and 2 transition into a complex knot of plots in Act 3, which actually ends up looking something like a tree. I don't really have a point to make here, other than what I said at the beginning. Nonlinear isn't very specific, and if you're making, reviewing, advertising, or just describing a game to friends or strangers on the internet, it's worth being specific about what a game is, and not what it isn't. If you've enjoyed this little thought experiment, drop a like and hit the subscribe button. If you want to see more video essay type stuff like this, let me know in the comments. Or if you think it's worth me doing a part 2 to this with more games, let me know. While you're here, check out our other content where you can see my friends and me playing games and speaking much less professionally. And enjoy the rest of your day.